Hey, what is going on, everybody? It has been way too long since you've seen me on a video outside of those beer reviews that I be occasionally posting on my social media platforms. But I've decided it's time to get back to my football content. I love speaking about the game, and why not kick the 2023 season content off with my favorite topic that I do every year, and it's always the first piece I typically release as I turn the page after the NFL draft and start looking towards the upcoming season, and that is year three wide receivers that I'm looking to target for my fantasy football teams for the upcoming year. This is a strategy. I think most people are aware of it. Basically, if you guys are unaware of it, wide receivers can take time to develop in the NFL, and usually it's that by year three, that third season in the league, that's when they're getting the nuances of the position down. That's when they have developed their route tree. They gotten the speed of the game. They're not overthinking when they're on the field, and that's when they usually take that leap and become the player and start to reach the ceiling of who they can be in the NFL. And there's examples of it every year. I think for me, the one that always sticks to my brain is Nelson Aguilar. Remember, like, people wanted to. Well, I guess you could argue if he's maybe could still be a bust as a first round pick, but people had issues with him in his first two seasons because he was a first round pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. And if you go look at his stats, he completely blew up in his third season. So that's why it's like a great strategy for me, because I think you can kind of filter out the top guys that are entering their third year to target up in the upper parts of the draft. But then you can also take swings on those guys that were first, second, third round picks that maybe haven't overly produced in their first two seasons, but could potentially break out in their third season if the situation that they're in is favorable for them. So yeah, with that being said, let's take a look at some examples though really quick of the last 3 years where this has happened. Back in 2020, it was Calvin Ridley. Year one, he had 92 targets, 64 receptions, and 821 yards and 10 touchdowns in 16 games. Year two, he had 93 targets, 63 receptions, 866 yards and 7 touchdowns in 13 games. And then you look at his year three, that's when it blew up. He skyrocketed to 143 targets. He had 90 receptions for 1,374 yards and 9 touchdowns in 15 games. And then in 2021, you can take a look at Deebo Samuel. Now, we're only going to look at the receiving stats for Deebo. Obviously, Deebo is very productive as a running back for the San Francisco 49ers. But in year one, he had 81 receptions 81 targets, and he had 57 receptions for 802 yards and 3 touchdowns in 15 games. And then in year two, he didn't play as much because he got hurt that year. He had 44 targets, he had 33 receptions, 391 yards, and a touchdown. And then you look at year three, as a receiver, he blew up. He skyrocketed to 121 targets. He had 77 receptions, 1,406 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 16 games. And of course, he had all that production that he did as a runner. And then just last year, obviously you could easily pull Justin Jefferson and what he did in year three, but I decided to pick CeeDee Lamb for the example because he's like that prime example of a first round wide receiver that has been very fantasy relevant and a steady producer for his offense, but then he really took the next step in year three. Year one, he had 111 targets, he had 74 receptions, 935 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And then in year two, he had the 120 targets, and he had 79 receptions, 1,102 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 16 games. And then you look at last year, his targets went up, 156 targets. He went over 100 receptions with 107, and then he had 1,359 yards and 9 touchdowns in 17 games. Is this a bulletproof type of concept or strategy you can go with? Not. There are letdowns of guys that you could think have a big year three, but I do find more times than not they are usually taking that jump, and they're at least being more productive in their third season. So that's why I'm always trying to get as many year three wide receivers on my roster. Just like I did from my video the last 2 years, I have it formatted the same where I kind of basically have two tiers. I have a top 5 list I'm going to go over with you guys, and then I'm going to go with guys I'm willing to use a draft pick on, and then there's guys I want to watch their roles unfold. So let's go ahead and dive into the list. Probably the easiest pick on this, despite the very talented top 4 players from that are entering their 3rd season, but it's easy going to be Jamar Chase. I can see him being like a Justin Jefferson in year 3, where he can be a offensive player of the year type of candidate by the end of December. But let's take a look at what he's done in the first 2 years. In year 1, he had 128 targets for 81 receptions for 1,455 yards and 13 touchdowns in 17 games. And then remember, last year he only played 12 games because he had that like hip flexor or whatever he had to deal with. But he still had 134 targets, so he had more targets in less games. He had 87 receptions, so he had more receptions in less games. Now, he did have less yardage, but again, he missed 5 games, but he had 1,046 yards, and then he just had the 9 touchdowns. But again, if you want to like kind of project that out to the 17-game schedule, he even would have been way more productive than he was as a rookie wide receiver. And then there's one thing I always like to do in the summertime. I like to take a look at stats, who have been the more productive players over the last 3 NFL seasons. And despite him only playing 2 out of the last 3 NFL seasons, he is actually tied for the 4th highest receiving yards per game among all NFL wide receivers with 86.2 yards a game. And then among all wide receivers since 2020, and these wide receivers had to have at least a minimum of 100 receptions, he's tied for the 7th highest yards per reception with 14.9 yards a catch. So yeah, I think Chase is going to blow up. Like I said, I can see him being the offensive player of the year candidate, and he's easily can be finished. I could see him finishing as the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football this year. Moving into the second on this list, I'm going with Jalen Waddle. The first season for Jalen Waddle, he had more targets than he did last year. He had 140 targets. He had 104 receptions, 1,015 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 16 games. Now, what's interesting for Waddle was the influx of Mike McDaniel and his offense and how he was utilized, because he did see a drop in targets, but it makes sense because they had Tyreek Hill last year. He had only 117 targets and only 75 receptions, but he was more productive per reception because he ended up finishing with 1,356 yards and he had the 8 touchdowns. And I'm very high on Waddle this year because he'll be the second year in Mike McDaniel's scheme. Now, Tyreek Hill is still there, but I'm kind of looking at Tyreek Hill is getting up there in the age. He's still going to be Tyreek Hill, right? But as obviously receivers get older, they might be prone to injury. I'm not projecting any type of injury, but I can just see Waddle ending up having a better year than Hill. I definitely could see him getting back to being over 100 receptions, getting double-digit touchdowns, and then if he has been as effective as he was last year in Mike McDaniel's scheme on less receptions, he should be able to cross over 1,500 yards. And I think he's going to have a huge year 3 for the Miami Dolphins. Moving into the next guy, Devontae Smith. This is another guy I was actually debating between Jalen Waddle and Devontae as a number 2 wide receiver on this list. But looking at what he's done over the last couple seasons, as a rookie, he had 104 targets. He finished with 64 receptions, 916 yards, and 5 touchdowns in the 17 games. In year 2, he had 136 targets. He finished with 95 receptions, 1,196 yards, 7 touchdowns in 17 games. Now, obviously, he has to deal with A.J. Brown. So, and A.J. Brown is why I was looking at it when I was putting together this the other day. And A.J. Brown's only like 26, 27. So he's still a young wide receiver. So I don't really see him like taking a step back at this point. A.J. is just going to he's been getting better every year. But I could still see with Devontae Smith taking a year 3 jump, him actually being the leading wide receiver for that Eagles offense this year and being more productive with his touches. Now, I think he's probably going to see around the same amount of targets, but I definitely see him going over 100 receptions this year. I think he can get to that 1,300 to 1,400 reception yard mark just because of A.J. Brown. I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to spread out throughout the season. And then I definitely could see him getting to the 10 touchdowns, and he's going to be a guy that can win you matches throughout the season. Moving to the fourth guy on the list, I feel like this is definitely a highest floor out of all of them. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amon-Ra in year one, 119 targets, 90 receptions, 912 yards, and 5 touchdowns in 17 games. And then last year, he had 146 targets for 106. He had 106 receptions on those targets and finished with 1,161 yards and 6 touchdowns in 16 games. Now, Amon-Ra, he's obviously, to me, the way I view him, he is a PPR machine. He's going to get a hefty amount of targets. He's going to get you a lot of receptions. And then the only thing that you want to see him do this season is kind of be more picking up more yards after the catch with his receptions, getting to that 1,300 yard mark, and then obviously getting to double digit touchdowns. But with how the Lions wide receiving room is right now, I think he easily gets over 100 receptions again this year. And then you just want to see him get to the 1,300 plus yards and double digit touchdowns. Now, the number 5 on the guy on my list, this is me kind of being a little bold here, especially with some of the guys that are in the next tier of players I'm going to speak about. But yeah, Nico Collins for the Houston Texans. He's a guy that's dealt with health issues over the last 2 seasons. He's only appeared in 24 games, but he's been consistent when he's been on the field, and he was putting together a very good second year last year. But let's take a look at his stats really quick. As a rookie, he had 60 targets, 33 receptions for 446 yards and a touchdown in 14 games. Last year, he had 66 targets and he had 37 receptions for 481 yards and 2 touchdowns in 10 games. He had a season-ending foot injury that caused him to miss the rest of the season in week 13. But I remember the videos I was doing last year, my waiver wire videos, and I was telling people to pick him up because he was a vital piece of the Houston Texans passing offense. Now, obviously, this is a new coaching staff. We got a new quarterback with C.J. Stroud, who's going to be way better than Davis Mills was. But with that being said, there's times last year that he was getting double-digit targets. He was getting 10 targets in a game. Now, obviously, they brought in Robert Woods. John Mechie will be back healthy, and they do got Tank Dell. But honestly, the way I view it is as long as he stays healthy and he's going to take that next step in year 3, I see and I project that Nico Collins is going to lead all the wide receivers and tight ends for Houston in targets this year. And then assuming that he does stay healthy and that plays out for him and he takes that year 3 jump, I could see him getting up to like 80 to 100 receptions. He should definitely be able to get you over 1,000 yards and at least get you that 7+ touchdowns. And with where he is going in drafts right now, it's not like you're going to have to use a high draft pick on him. And he's a guy where I think he can come out of nowhere. He's a guy you probably stash on your bench, but if it's a preseason and there's training camp hype around him, I could see his ADP steadily rising by the end of the summer. So yeah, those are the top 5 year 3 wide receivers I am targeting for my rosters this year. Now moving into the next tier, I'm just going to kind of quickly run over these players. These are guys I'm willing to use a draft pick. Now this name might upset some fantasy people because I know some fantasy people are very high on him. But Kadarius Toney, the reason why he's one of there's 2 guys in this list that I debated over Nico Collins at that 5 spot, but I ended up moving him out of the 5 spot just because Travis Kelce at the end of the day is going to be the leading guy in targets in that passing offense for for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then on top of that too, there's still some rumblings where the Kansas City Chiefs are able to work out this contract extension with Chris Jones that can potentially create cap space where they could sign DeAndre Hopkins. So if that comes in, that's definitely a damper to Kadarius Toney's ceiling as a fantasy player. But in my opinion, I think Toney's is able to win you games throughout the year, but I just don't know if he's can be able to consistently win you games. Obviously, we have to see him stay healthy. He's never really had. I don't think he. When I was looking it over, he hasn't had a game where he's had over 100 receiving yards, and so that's my biggest issue. But at the end of the day, he does have an opportunity to lead this offense and to lead the wide receivers outside of Travis Kelce in targets, assuming that they are going to use him like they've talked about him through the media. And then anytime you got a player with Mahomes, you kind of take the gamble. But my biggest worry is I could see it being like obviously Kelce's Kelce, But the guys outside of Kelsey, I could be like, oh, it's Kadarius Toney's week. Oh, it's Sky Moore's week. Oh, it's MVS's week. I could see those wide receivers kind of having their weeks throughout the season. Moving into the next guy, another guy I was debating if I should have put him over Nico Collins in the 5th spot is Elijah Moore. The reason why I didn't is he just has to prove it on the field consistently. Obviously, there were a lot of factors with the New York Jets and what happened there and his role within that offense. But I think he's a viable candidate for a year 3 breakout with the Cleveland Browns. It was reported in OTAs he was looking great and he had a connection with Deshaun Watson. It sounds like Watson is on the trajectory of getting back to the Deshaun Watson that we saw play in Houston before his whole off-field issue derailed his career, and he's trying to get things back on track, and it sounds like he has been performing well. But again, just like Elijah Moore, like you can make up all these excuses why they weren't playing well last year, but at the end of the day, we got to see it this year. So you don't want to like completely buy into an OTA practice. I'm just trying to say that really quick. And then lastly, with Moore, the reason why I held him out of the 5th spot is, I don't know if he's going to lead the Browns. I don't even know if he's going to have the second most targets for the Browns among all the wide receivers, because obviously they got David Njoku in that passing offense, and then he's got to compete with Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Cedric Tillman, the new rookie, for targets. But he's a guy I'm definitely willing to take a chance on and draft him on my rosters, because I think he's like one of those guys that can come out of nowhere and have that year 3 jump. Next guy in this list, in this tier, Josh Palmer, the Chargers wide receiver. Honestly, he would have been in my top 5 if the Chargers didn't pick Quentin Johnson in the 1st round of this past draft. He's likely going to probably end up being the 4th in the pecking line for targets. But one thing with Josh Palmer is we know Mike Williams is always dealing with like some type of back injury, and then Keenan Allen dealt with injuries last year, and obviously he is a year older. So there is a chance where if injuries happen, Palmer will be just as fantasy relevant as he was last year. I mean, last year he had his moments throughout the season where you're starting him because Keenan Allen was hurt, and then Mike was missing games too, and he was leading the team in targets. And then obviously we have to see if the rookie wide receiver Quentin Johnson is ready to make an impact contribution for the Chargers offense in his 1st season. Next guy on the list is pretty simple. Rashod Bateman. Biggest concern is health. We haven't seen him play on the field. And then obviously he is competing with targets with OBJ and Zay Flowers, but he's a former 1st round wide receiver that does have all the talent to be a quality starting wide receiver in the NFL. And then with the Todd Monken offense coming to Baltimore, they're going to be opening up the passing attack more. So they're going to be utilizing more wide receivers, in my opinion. We'll have to see how it plays. That's just my summer opinion on how I think this Ravens offense is going to look. I think they're going to spread the ball out more often and put the ball through the air. And so again, though, the guys he is competing with targets, it's OBJ. Like OBJ's OBJ, but he has health concerns, injury history. So we have to see if OBJ can stay on the field. And then as great as I think Zay Flowers is going to be, he's a 1st round rookie, so he may have that like rookie wall he hits. He may struggle in year 1. So there is an opportunity where Rashod Bateman could end up having the most targets on this Ravens passing attack this season. Next guy on the list, going with Rondale Moore for the Arizona Cardinals. I'm willing to take a late round draft swing on him. I was a big fan of him entering the league. Obviously, like injuries and just like the disaster that it has been for the Cardinals over the last couple years have not worked out for him. But with his situation, he can have the 2nd most targets behind Marquise Brown. My biggest concern, though, is like when is Kyler Murray going to be back, and when he's not in the lineup, how effective is this passing attack going to be? But the reason why I like the opportunity is he's a year 3 wide receiver that can have the 2nd most targets on the Cardinals, and outside of James Conner, there's not really a legitimate threat out of the backfield. They don't really have a legitimate passing threat, and that's not what James Conner does as a running back. And Rondale Moore can be lined up in the backfield and take those screens and use kind of of in a gadget type of way in the offense. So I can see some manufactured touches for him that way as well. And again, he's like a late round dart swing to take that year 3 jump. And then my moving into the last tier, there's a couple guys I'll speak about really quick. These are guys for you to watch how their roles unfold. These are guys entering, year 3, but haven't really shown much in their first 2 seasons. The first guy is for the Panthers, Terrace Marshall Jr. I could see him sliding into being worth a pick by the end of the summer. We just got to see how this training camp battle unfolds between him, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, the rookie Jonathan Mingo, and they do got Laviska Shenault there. But if everything works out in his favor and he's taking a year 3 jump and he ends up out competing the other wide receivers in the room, you could have a viable role in that Panthers offense with Bryce Young in his rookie season. And then in Bryce Young's rookie season, obviously Terrace Marshall's entering year 3. And then the last guy, I'm going to go with that little small wide receiver out there in Los Angeles with the Rams, Tutu Atwell, just because he was a second round pick and they don't really have like a legitimate guy that's going to probably be third in the pecking line for targets for the Los Angeles Rams. He'll be battling with Ben Skoranek, Demarcus Robinson, and a rookie, and I hope I don't butcher his name, Puka Nacua, for third in targets behind obviously Cooper Kupp, and then they have Van Jefferson. The biggest concern obviously too is like Matthew Stafford staying healthy, but if Matthew Stafford's back to being healthy and it's Matthew Stafford and a Sean McVay offense, and Tutu can take that next step and be a contributor, especially like a deep threat for that offense, he might be a guy, just like I said, just watch and see how his role unfolds. He might be somebody that you pick up off the waivers like in week 4 of the season because either injuries or whatever happens to your team, or he is showing that he's going to be playing a consistent role within the Rams offense. So yeah, that is my first video, guys, back. Of course, year 3 wide receivers that I'm looking to target this season. And my football content, video content is back, guys. So I'll be looking to do 2 videos a week. You'll at least get 1 a week. And then once it gets into August, it gets in the thick of things, I will be doing 2 a week. And then of course, when the NFL season starts, I will be giving my top streaming defenses, waiver wire ads, and all that. With that being said, guys, if you enjoyed my first video back on here, make sure you hit the like button. If you haven't followed or subscribed me, make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button. And then if you guys have any suggestions, I'm open to suggestions on content to make this month. I'm going to be kind of like winging it until it gets closer to the draft time, and I'll start dropping my like quarterback and running back, wide receiver rankings, stuff like that. So I am open to suggestions if you guys want to hear any type of topics that you want to talk on, for me to talk on. It doesn't have to be fantasy football. I may be producing also just like basic NFL content as well. So yeah, open to suggestions. Get in the comments section. I'll make sure you check that out. And if you guys ever have any questions, shoot me a message. I'll get back to you. But I appreciate everybody watching my first video back. I'm glad to be back. I hope you guys have a great week. Talk to you in my next video. Peace out.